culture has changed and how these factors played into last weekend's election result. That's right after the news when the real story continues.
This is the BBC World Service, where Berliners reveal the stories of the Jewish families who once lived in their homes in Nazi Germany.
I found out that from our flat, 9 people got deported.
Do you know how many of them survived?
Nobody survived.
The city is full of memorials to the victims. But for this documentary, I'm going to get as close as is possible to get to the world they lost. I'm Jo Glanville. I'll be visiting the kitchens they cooked in, the bedrooms they slept in, the front rooms they relaxed in.
Sie sind auch diese Treppe.
They walk down the same stairs to take down the rubbish, and they watch the S-Bahn train passing from that balcony. There are lots of parallels, which helps me understand what it was like to live here in this flat at that time.
Our House. Stories of the Holocaust. Tuesday at 9:30 and 20 GMT.
Coming up on the real story in the next half hour, it's 75 years since Chinese nationalists, bloodied, bedraggled, defeated, sought sanctuary on the island of Taiwan from triumphant communists who still run China to this day. Beijing thinks reunification is long overdue. Judging by last weekend's presidential election result, though, Taiwanese voters view themselves less and less as Chinese. What does that mean for the future of Taiwan and its relationship with its neighbour? That's after a summary of the news.
BBC News with Debbie Russ. The White House has insisted that the creation of a Palestinian state is the only way to ensure Israel's security, after its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, publicly dismissed the idea. A spokesman in Washington said it was clear that the US and Israel saw things differently. Heavy fighting has continued into Friday morning in southern Gaza's main city, Khan Yunis, as Israeli forces continue their offensive. The Hamas-run health ministry said more than 70 people were killed overnight. Pakistan's government has called a national security meeting as pressure grows to avoid any further worsening of relations with Iran. Earlier this week, both countries carried out strikes on each other's territory. Nearly 300 Burmese soldiers have entered India after fleeing an attack by insurgents. Indian officials say the troops crossed into Mizoram state from Myanmar. They've been battling a group near the border called the Arakan Army. Indian police say at least 5 people have been killed in the latest ethnic violence in the state of Manipur. Clashes broke out last May between members of the majority Meitei and minority Kuki communities. The Indian company Tata Steel is expected to confirm plans later today to cut up to 3,000 jobs in Britain. Most of the job losses are expected to be at its Port Talbot plant in Wales. France has announced a month-long ban on almost all commercial fishing in the Bay of Biscay to protect dolphins. The measure starts on Monday. There's been a surge in dolphin deaths on the Atlantic coast. North Korea says it's carried out another test of an underwater drone, which Pyongyang claims could be used to deliver nuclear weapons. State media said it was in response to joint naval exercises by the United States, South Korea and Japan. BBC News.
You're listening to The Real Story from the BBC World Service with me, Sean Lay. This week, we're discussing the future of Taiwan and how last weekend's election results may affect it. Our panel are Vicky Wong, writer, interpreter and stand-up comedian, Amanda Shao, senior analyst with the International Crisis Group, and Sydney Yue, who is associate teaching professor in communications at the University of Missouri. One way identity expresses itself is through culture, the language, the visual arts, and of course music. Sean Hugh owns the Double Square Art Gallery in Taipei and has been curating art exhibitions in Taiwan for some 30 years now. I asked him how he's seen the expression of Taiwanese identity change over that period.
I would say that it's changing little by little from being Chinese to Taiwanese in the past 30 years, especially after the 1987, which was the year that we stopped the martial law. Since then, Taiwanese people started to look for the national identity and our cultural subjectivity. So as you can see that our culture is very diverse. Taiwan in the past, 100 years is so influenced by, of course, by Chinese culture, but also Japanese culture and American culture. Now, more and more Southeastern Asian people, they move to Taiwan. They also bring different culture in my country as well. So after years, as you can see, our new generations, they don't really think they are Chinese, as their parents or their grandparents think. They think they are Taiwanese. We call them like a natural, independent people.
Can I ask you a bit about those influences, particularly, for example, the Japanese influence? Because the Japanese controlled the island for a long period. Is that sense of kind of Japanese culture still alive on the island? Has that been sort of absorbed into what you would now call Taiwanese identity?
The Japanese government colonized Taiwan for 50 years. You can see that the Japanese culture is everywhere, from the young generation's fashion. And many young people, they learn how to speak Japanese. But at this moment, that Korean is much more popular because of the K-pop.
Of course. So Taiwan is quite open to cultural influences.
Very, very open. That is why I think Taiwan is very different from a traditional Chinese culture. For young generation, we think that what is Taiwanese culture, which is diverse.
I suppose one example of that would be the attitude towards gay rights in Taiwan.
Yes. Taiwan is the first country in Asia that legalized same-sex marriage. So I think this is the best example for new Taiwanese culture. I mean, the new Taiwanese people grew up in freedom of speech. In here, we can criticize our government, without any fear, without any hesitation.
Let me ask you about the art of this new generation. First thing I wanted to ask you this. You've said there are all these influences. How has that expressed itself in Taiwanese art today?
Young generations, they like to do more experimental artwork based on the issues that related to, let's say, national identity, our culture, what is real Taiwanese culture, and to rebuild our art history.
How successful have the younger